why do you think the most interesting worm diseases are in tropical areas?
Why are the most interesting worm diseases in tropical areas? I don't really know. That just seems to be where they're located. I think a lot of it has to do with the climate and the temperature, is they can support some of these worms better. You know, moist, damp sort of soil and air and those sorts of things, whereas here we've got cold winters and things like that that would kill off those sorts of worms. So who knows, maybe as the world continues to warm through global warming, they'll start moving our way.
That's a scary thought.
It is, but with a lot of global travel, you know, doctors here in the United States used to not really see many of those sorts of infections, but as people travel and are in the military and come back to the United States from places like this, doctors here in the United States are starting to see a lot of these sorts of infections. We actually see a lot of malaria infections in the United States.
Oh, wow.
Which we used to not see, but because of travel, you can see most anything anymore.
That's interesting.
A little scary too.
Yeah. Now, what is the most interesting thing you've personally seen with your career?
Oh, well, unfortunately I'm not an actual physician. I shouldn't say unfortunately, but I'm not an actual physician, so I don't actually get to really get out and see patients. But when I was doing research, my research was on the immune system in the female reproductive tract, and I was interested in how we fight off sexually transmitted infections, particularly things like gonorrhea, chlamydia, those sorts of things. And so I spent some time in a pathology lab looking at hysterectomy specimens. So they would, you know, women for whatever reason would have their, you know, uterus and fallopian tubes and those sorts of things taken out. So getting to actually see some of those organs, you know, because I've never been in surgery, I've never seen a cadaver body, any of those sorts of things, but getting to see some of those organs that are the ones that I'm interested in the immune system, to me was really cool. And you got to see some of the pathology, like I saw a fibroid tumor, which is really kind of just a big hard knot of tissue that shouldn't be there in someone's uterus. It was the size of a softball.
Oh,
it was bigger than the actual uterus itself. And you can imagine what kind of pain and discomfort that might cause a woman, and you know why they would need to have it taken out. But just seeing some of those sorts of things are just, to me, amazing. And I can see why people would want to be doctors and surgeons. Just the blood's not for me.
Now, what is your favorite part specifically of the immune system? Like, why do you think it's the most important?
The innate immune system, which is the earliest part of the immune system, because if you don't get that really early response with things like neutrophils and macrophages and dendritic cells, none of the rest of it happens. You don't get any of those T cells and B cells, you don't get any of those antibodies, you don't get any of that memory that'll help you fight the infection the next time you encounter it. We'd be sick all the time if we didn't have an innate immune system. In fact, there are individuals that have deficiencies or genetic defects in parts of their innate immune system that have chronic infections, particularly with bacteria, that stay sick almost all the time with things like strep throat or pneumonia, things like that that we take for granted that we can, you know, get rid of or cure or it will go away, but they stay sick with it all the time because their innate immune system doesn't work, particularly the neutrophils.
Now, if you have an autoimmune disease and you die from it, it normally isn't from that disease. It's from your immune system not working and you catch something else.
Can be. It absolutely can be. So a lot of times with an autoimmune disease, your immune system is kind of overactive. So sometimes, yeah, if your immune system isn't working right, it's typically from another disease, not actually the autoimmune disease. But there is one called lupus that can actually affect any organ in the body. And that actually can cause damage to some of the organs like the lungs and the liver and things like that. And that's one where you can get primary damage that could lead to death from the actual autoimmune disease itself. But typically it's usually due to some other sort of thing because the immune system isn't working right.
Now, is lupus like common or is it very rare?
For an autoimmune disease, it's relatively common. I don't know what the percentage of people that have it is. One of the things that is known is that it's actually a little bit more common in African American women. And so it's more common in women in general, but particularly in African American women. It's one of those genetic things that for some reason certain autoimmune diseases hit, you know, Asian women, some hit African American women, some hit Caucasian women. Lupus seems to be more predominant in African American women for some reason. It's not really clear as to why that is.
That's really interesting to know how the genes can be different in something like that.
Absolutely. Well, and just the fact of having estrogen and progesterone, being a woman, having those versus testosterone makes a huge difference in how the immune system functions, and can lead to autoimmune disease.
Why do you think that is?
You know, estrogen and progesterone, we typically think of those as things that regulate the menstrual cycle in women. But so many cells throughout the body, particularly in the brain, you know, things like the breast, the lungs, the heart, all of those, almost all the cells in the body have some sort of responsiveness to estrogen and progesterone. And so they can regulate all sorts of, you know, biochemical and physical responses throughout the body. And it just, it's a major controller of everything from, you know, the menstrual cycle to the immune system to even how the brain develops in the uterus, or in the uterus, so in the fetus.
Wow.
Yeah, hormones are cool too.
Now, even being like an immunologist, you have to take hormones into effect, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a lot of what I was looking at when I was doing research, was looking at how the cycling hormones of progesterone and estrogen affected our ability to fight sexually transmitted diseases. Because there's certain times during the menstrual cycle that women are more likely to become infected with sexually transmitted infections.
Wow.
Because of the way the levels of their hormones. And so if we can somehow bridge that gap, you know, kind of fill that window, or make the immune system respond better during that window, you know, might be able to decrease the number of sexually transmitted infections that women get, particularly with things like gonorrhea or chlamydia that women most of the time don't know that they have.
Now, would you say hormones could be a part of the immune system's physiology?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Huge regulator, part of the immune system's physiology.
Okay. I think we're out of questions. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
What is your name?
I'm Dr. Jennifer Smith. I'm an assistant professor of microbiology and immunology here at the Commonwealth Medical College, and I'm also the director of our Masters of Biomedical Sciences program.
Wow. What is your degree specifically in?
It's actually in biomedical sciences, which covers a whole broad field of kind of all of the medical sciences, so everything from biochemistry to microbiology to anatomy, but my focus is in microbiology and immunology.
That's really neat. What kind of background is necessary for this type of work?
Oh, a lot of science and a lot of math.
Okay.
Really, pretty much any science class you can take and get your hands on will help, because they all teach you how to kind of think in a certain way and do critical thinking and that sort of stuff. So it's important to be able to get those kinds of skills down, and any science and math class you can take will get you there.
Okay. What made you choose this career path?
What made me choose this career path? That's an interesting question. I actually started off as a teacher, teaching high school
really?
science. Yeah, I taught biology and chemistry for a couple of years, and decided that I wanted to go on and see what it was like to work in a lab, those sorts of things. So I went to graduate school, started working in a lab, fell in love with it, playing with bacteria and white blood cells, those sorts of things. Did postdoctoral work, which you have to do if you want to go on and be a research scientist. Came here, started teaching again, fell in love with teaching, so now I'm pretty much teaching and not really doing that much research, but I still enjoy it and love it.
What does your job exactly entail now?
Oh, depends on the day. Some days I actually am in the lab helping colleagues with experiments. Some days I'm in the classroom teaching medical students or master's students. Some days I'm in meetings. Some days, like today, I'm doing interviews, you know, with you guys, and I have phone interviews with potential students this afternoon. A lot of meetings, but mostly a lot of teaching. So a lot of preparing to teach, working on doing a lot of reading and background knowledge to make sure that I'm current and up to date with what it is that I'm teaching, and making sure that I'm giving the right information to students, because you don't want medical students or doctors to go out there with wrong information.
Sounds like you have a lot of homework.
I do a lot of homework. Everybody thinks, oh, you work here 8 to 5, but there's a lot that goes on literally at home as well. I spend a lot of evenings and weekends reading papers or reading textbooks and those sorts of things, and making PowerPoint slides and making what we call podcasts, which are kind of PowerPoint slides that you talk over. So they're kind of like video cast sorts of things for the medical students. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work that you don't
That's really
you don't get to see.
What is your favorite immune cell?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that. It's the neutrophil. So the neutrophil is a white blood cell that's really aggressive, and it's one of the first white blood cells that kind of comes in and deals with bacteria and those sorts of things. So it's our very first kind of specific line of defense against things like bacteria. And they're really cool little cells. They've got all sorts of neat ways of fighting off and killing bacteria and protecting us. And they do it in such a kind of non-specific way compared to other white blood cells that they're just really cool little cells.
Okay, how does that cell function exactly to protect the immune system?
How does it function? It does a number of things. It does something called phagocytosis, which means that it kind of eats and gobbles up bacteria. So you've got a bacteria here, and then you've got an immune cell or a neutrophil, and it'll come up and kind of engulf and take in that bacteria, and then it has a number of enzymes that help break down that bacteria. Plus it's got a whole bunch of other really cool molecules that can poke holes in the bacteria and cause it to kind of explode or implode. They're just really cool things, and they've got 5 or 6 different ways that they can kill bacteria, and that's really what they do. They also send out signals to other immune cells to come in and help.
Okay. How does the difference between neutrophils, macrophages, and dendritic cells work?
Oh, okay. So macrophages are the next cells that come in. So one of those cells that a neutrophil calls in to help can be macrophages and dendritic cells. Macrophages are kind of similar to neutrophils. They can kill in a lot of the same ways, but they're not, I want to say they're not as vicious about it.
Okay. Are they also white blood cells?
They're also white blood cells. All three are white types of white blood cells.
Okay.
But typically, once something like a macrophage or a neutrophil has broken down or digested up a bacteria, or even a dendritic cell for that matter, they go on and they show pieces of the digested bacteria to things called lymphocytes, which then can make things like antibodies that will help us have long-lasting immunity to that bacteria that we got infected with.
Okay. What are the cells that memorize the previous antibodies?
So those are going to be your lymphocytes. So they can be B cells or T cells. So T cells, there are 2 different types of T cells. There's one type of T cell that helps B cells make antibodies, and there's another type of T cell that actually does killing. And they both can remember the infection that you've had previously. But probably the one that most people are familiar with are B cells that produce antibodies. And so once you've been infected with something, a B cell produces what's called a memory cell. And that memory cell, the next time you encounter that bacteria or that infection, starts producing these already made antibodies, and you can fight off the infection faster and sooner than you would have had you not ever seen the bacteria before.
Now, are killer cells like a subcategory of T cells?
They're similar to T cells. They're made from the same original cell as T cells, so there's an original cell that all these different cells kind of come from, kind of like a tree. So they're similar to T cells, but they actually do killing kind of like that one type of T cell.
Okay.
So they can directly kill. They kill cells that don't look right. So a lot of times they're good at killing virus-infected cells or cancer cells particularly. So those cells that are maybe look kind of like our own cells, but there's just something not quite right to them, those are what killer cells see and want to kill and get rid of, versus something that's like a bacteria or a worm or something like that.
Okay. Is it true that B cells and T cells are made in the bone marrow, but the T cells move to the thymus to mature?
Absolutely. So all of our immune cells are made in the bone marrow. So our white blood cells and our red blood cells are made in the bone marrow. And most of them mature and become the cell that they're going to be completely become in the bone marrow, with the exception of T cells. And they go to the thymus, which is an organ that's kind of over the heart, in the chest. And that's where they become mature. That's where they see what we call antigen. So a piece of a bacteria or a piece of a virus, that's where they see that for the first time, and that tells them what kind of white blood cell, what kind of T cell they're going to be, and what infection they're going to fight.
Okay. And then something we're interested in learning more about are worms.
Worms. Worms are my favorite.
What kind of worms do you think are the most interesting?
I think worms in general are interesting. There are worms that we get here in the United States. You've probably heard of things like maybe pinworm, or if you have a dog or a cat, you've heard of heartworm. Mm-hmm. Those are kind of common, boring worms that you can take a pill and get rid of. All of the really cool ones are the ones that we find in tropical countries. So in places like South America, Africa, the Middle East, a lot of them kind of get into your skin, come in through your skin, burrow into your skin, and there's one that's my favorite. It's called strongyloides. Comes in through your skin, a lot of times through your foot, because it's in the dirt and that sort of stuff. Comes in through your foot, wiggles its way through the body, gets into your liver, gets into your bloodstream. From your bloodstream, it then comes up into your lungs, where you cough it up, swallow it, and then it goes into your GI tract, and it keeps doing that cycle until you get rid of it. And it actually can live in your body 30, 50 years without you even knowing it, unless you become immunocompromised, so have some sort of thing like HIV, have an organ transplant where you have to be on medications. If you're on medications for something like rheumatoid arthritis, something that suppresses your immune system, then you might find out that you have that sort of worm. But it's really cool, and it's just disgusting because it wiggles all through your body. You cough it up, you swallow it, and you don't even know that you're doing it. And sometimes the people that have, so like an HIV patient that has this worm, when they have the really bad infection, you get worms coming out in their mucus, in their stool, in their urine, pretty much every body